All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Friday afternoon session. We're already 1 week into the festival. Feels like a month, right? Well, thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to have you all here. My name is Matt. I'm the editor of Macau Closer magazine, which is Ricardo Pinto's publication. And over the years, we've collaborated a few times with Thomas on travel stories. So I've probably encountered you many years ago and met you for the first time 5 minutes ago. So, but I'm very glad that you look like an authentic train engineer. That's exactly what I was expecting from someone who's caught a lot of trains in China. It's a pleasure to welcome Thomas back to Macau and back to the festival. I believe it's not your first time at the festival. I think, is it the second or third time? Third time, yep, yeah. So, and of course tonight Thomas is going to be particularly talking to us about his book Harmony Express, his adventures by train around China. Just quick show of hands, I'm sure we've got some old China hands in the audience. How many of you have travelled in China by train? There we go, okay, yes, so, kindred spirits. So, Thomas first came to China in 2005 and he's been living here and travelling here ever since. I think he caught his first train in China in 2005. So as we all know, the trains have changed quite a lot since then. But he did most of his travel in China between 2014 and 2019. Bit of a nomadic lifestyle for 6 years, travelling all over the countryside. We were just sharing before the session, we have a few things in common, and I also did a bit of train travel when I first arrived in China, and I did most of my train travel was 1999 to 2000, and I remember some very long, slightly uncomfortable train travel, but always an adventure. Lots of red, white and blue bags and lots of sunflower seed shells piled up on the floor. But yeah, I mean, I think all of us here have a real love and passion for China, and we all know that it can be a real adventure to travel in. So without further ado, I'll invite Thomas to have a chat with us, and after he speaks, we can open it up to the floor and have a little bit of a Q&A session. So Thomas, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everyone for coming out. I'll start with a bit of housekeeping, just because if I don't do it at the beginning, then I'll forget at the end. So first of all, thank you so much to Ricardo Pinto for putting this all together. He's sort of lingering outside somewhere. But it's amazing to support literature and the arts in Macau as much as he's done, and for so many years, and he's been very supportive of me and my career. Also, thank you for noticing my outfit. We do have a fellow overall wearer here. I posted a photo today on WeChat because I felt that I looked like a railway engineer or railway traveller, and some smart aleck wrote Mario, as in Super Mario. So sort of popped my conceit about the outfit there. But I did actually travel here by train. We've been doing the rough guides to China. There's going to be a new guidebook. So I came from Yunnan, 3,300 meters above sea level, high-speed train from Shangri-La to Kunming, night train to Guiyang, and then stayed 1 day in Guiyang, and then took the high-speed train to Zhuhai. So basically traveling from like Portugal to Sweden. And it's amazing how efficient and easy railway travel is, even compared with 2019 when I sort of finished researching Harmony Express. Okay, so continuing the theme of doing things a bit in reverse, I'm going to start by recommending 2 books, because whenever I do these talks, there's often students that say, well, I'd like to be a travel writer. What book should I read? So there's a sort of conceit amongst, sort of some artists that we are somehow unique or special. But we're really just standing on the shoulders of giants and carrying on a tradition. And I thought that'd be an interesting way to begin, which is how I first got inspired to write this book all these years ago. So could we have the first slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so There's two books here. One is from Eric Newby, The Big Red Train Ride from 1977. He's a sort of celebrated travel writer of a certain generation. This book is very strange because it came to me by my father. My father, A, doesn't like literature particularly, and B, never gave me any gifts. And yet one day he came home and said, "Oh, I think you might like this, you're always reading." And it really inspired me for a number of reasons. One is because we kind of live in the era of the specialist, like you're an anthropologist or you're a psychologist or you're a geographer. And what this book revealed to me was that you could be all of those things. You could be a journalist, a novelist, a historian, that travel literature could pack all those disciplines into one narrative. The second book, probably more famous, more familiar to you guys, is the book that brought me to China. Now, many people I know who worked and lived in China, there was a book, and they said, "I read that, and I knew I was going to go." And for a lot of my generation, it was Rivertown. You remember this book? But for me, it was Paul Theroux's Riding the Iron Rooster. When he traveled through by train in 1986-87, and it published in 1988. At that time, China had only been open to independent travel for a few years. And it became this mecca for railway steam buffs because it had been closed and the technology had more or less not developed since the 1950s and 60s. So that was the book that made me think I wanted to go to China and write a railway travelogue. Now, I arrived in 2005. That's an auspicious year because that's the last year that China ran a steam train on a main line. Okay, only 2005 if you think about it. Okay, by 2008, they had their first high-speed rail line. So that's like a remarkable acceleration in technological development. My problem when I arrived in China was that unlike Mr. Theroux or Mr. Newby, who had big publishing deals and lots of money advanced to them to write a brilliant book, is that I didn't have any money and I had to have a job. So I began as an English teacher, like most people, and I could only travel during Chinese New Year and holidays when it's very difficult to get tickets and everywhere was overcrowded. Eventually, I gravitated into, next slide please, becoming a model, okay? Okay, that's me in my youth. Actually, I wasn't in modeling at all. I was actually the editor of the magazine. The only way somebody as short as me can get a modeling job is if you're also the editor and you commission it. So I ran this magazine for a number of years in the Pearl River Delta. They were a wonderful period where I learned to be a writer, learned to be a journalist. I had a gorgeous Hunanese girlfriend. I had a rock and roll band. And then within 1 month, I managed to lose the job, the girlfriend, and the band, okay? Life happens, right? It was just a sort of, I was kind of distraught and depressed, but at the same time, it's when you lose something, it sometimes gives you a freedom. And that period meant that I could suddenly write my answer to Paul Theroux's Riding the Iron Rooster, okay? At this point, it's 2013, 2014. This is an interesting time because it's almost hard to remember now in this period of like political stratification and new Cold War politics and all the rest of it. But China had become hot in the West. Do you remember there was this, for a lot of Brits, we all remember 2014 when Xi Jinping went to England and had a pint of ale with David Cameron, and they said cheers to a golden era of Anglo-Sino relations that lasted for about 2 years and then fell apart, as they always do. But China was very hot. Everyone was interested in China. You know, there's usually a lag on these things. China had been growing and developing for a long time, but the world had gotten wind of it. So for somebody like me who was prepared to be like a freelance travel writer, I had a lot of work, from BBC Travel, CNN Travel, Macau Closer, South China Morning Post, Lonely Planet, Rough Guides. They all wanted people to go around China and write copy. And I was suddenly free to do that and keep a diary of my railway travels. However, there was another challenge, which was, it was a time of great flux. So if we could have the next thing. So China's always the sort of the land of big numbers. This is a picture I took in Harbin railway station, but I think anyone who's traveled in China by train will recognize that that's a pretty typical railway station scene in the world's now second most populous country, then the first most populous. So I'm giving you 2008 to 2023, but my period of railway travel sort of in the middle of that, okay? And you can see that high-speed travel went from 118 kilometers to 42,000 kilometers in that short expanse. Next slide. This is China's, in 2022, how much of the global high-speed rail China has when compared with everyone else. Next slide, please. Okay, so as of 2025, China's high-speed railway network is the longest in the world with over 50,000 kilometers of dedicated track. That was announced last December. Does anybody know where the 50,000 kilometers reached? Yan'an, the caves where Mao Zedong and the communist rebels hid out. So a very auspicious place to commemorate 50,000 kilometers of dedicated track. Okay, the world's longest HSR railway line is the Beijing-Guangzhou high-speed railway, stretching for 2,298 kilometers. It also connects with Hong Kong in the south and Harbin in the northeast, creating the world's longest HSR transport corridor. Okay, so this gives a perspective of how Chinese New Year travel has changed. We should note that Chinese New Year travel is the biggest migration of any mammal on Earth, okay? So 266 million train trips were made during the 40-year Spring Festival travel rush in 2014. That's when I began my book, rising to 430 million by 2019. That's when I finished my book. In 2026, China's railway system handled 538 million passenger trips during the 40-day Spring Festival period. Just mind-boggling. Xi Jinping's signature Rejuvenation Express, named after the goal of national rejuvenation, connects Beijing and Shanghai with top speeds of 350 kilometers per hour. These are effectively China's fastest trains, covering a distance equivalent of that from Chicago to New York in fewer than 5 hours, a journey that takes 19 hours on Amtrak. And finally, the national railway operator has unveiled a blueprint to expand the country's operational railway network to around 180,000 kilometers by 2030, with high-speed routes totaling 60,000 kilometers and accounting for 1/3 of all the full network as part of the country's infrastructure push between 2026 and 2030. So this is an ongoing project. I think this last statistic is important as well, because it shows that China's not abandoning regular rail. It's also expanding its regular network. So it's not just high speed. High speed needs a dedicated track. And that's because it needs to move more freight, but also because China in many ways is two countries, an urban country and a rural country, and still very much marked by that distinction. So it almost needs two public transport infrastructures to cater to the rich and the poor. Okay, so next slide. So that sort of brings me to the two themes of the book that were really unexpected, but sort of pervaded all the pages and the chapters. One was that China had not always been a railway superpower. In fact, very much the contrary. This is the network in 1978. Next slide, please. So that's when Deng Xiaoping became the paramount leader, and the nationwide system totaled 51,700 kilometers, which was about the mileage of the United States in 1860. So one of the themes of my book, inevitably, is just this extraordinary progress and change and drive and expansion, okay? And the other theme of the book is sort of class stratification, which is this. I thought, and I think we all do this to some degree, is we have a very homogeneous view of China. And that's part of the fault of the Communist Party, because it projects a view of China as being very unified, moving forward, being developed. You know, the CCP's propaganda billboards will always have a high-speed train racing through amazing countryside, beautiful scenery, right? But also because of the media that is dominated by Washington, D.C. and New York, that has a sort of Cold War, yellow peril, red threat element to it, also presents like a sort of one-dimensional image of China as just being this thing. And I love this picture. It's my friend Wang Lu. Wang Lu actually took the photo to the rear of my book, which you can take a look at later. But I think there's so much in this picture. You know, this high-speed technology, then these Qing dynasty buildings, and then these sort of boxed manufacturing houses as well. The thing about China is that sometimes you have all these worlds just living side by side, and that the railway gives you that sort of viewpoint to see it that no other kind of transport would do. So on that note, I started to think about China as I traveled by rail between 2014 and 2019 in terms of like superlative travel. So you have China's longest railway, shortest railway, highest railway, oldest railway, fastest railway. And I thought that by taking the superlative trains, you could offer a portrait of the nation in all its diversity, rather than presenting this sort of very homogeneous political view that most people churn out. So on that note, I'll read to you first what was then China's fastest train. I only have the Kindle version here because I've been traveling. And I'll read you about what was then China's most advanced train, which was the Shanghai Maglev. And there had been a plan to build maglevs all across China. And there's part of me, the sort of teenage science fiction reader, that loves the idea of sort of Chinese flying around China. But it was deemed too expensive and too complicated. So this was a prototype, and it became like a tourist attraction. So orientation in China was seldom intuitive. After following several contradictory signs and asking umpteen bystanders for directions, misunderstandings and misturns finally got me out of Pudong Airport and headed in the direction of the ticket counter. In the queue ahead of me, some out-of-towners, identifiable by oversized sun hats and brightly colored wheelie suitcases, crowded one another with the intimacy of kittens, the yin to the teller's yang, who vended tickets with the verve of a robot. Inside the Spartan waiting room, a pair of Ming vases, a model train in a perspex case, and some illustrated wall plaques furnished the only point of interest beyond selfie stick portraiture. On the wall, under the heading Maglev Superiorities, I read how the machine I was about to climb aboard compared with other popular modes of transport. Car, 160 kilometers an hour. F1, 350 kilometers an hour. Rapid train, 300 kilometers an hour. Metro, 80 kilometers an hour. Maglev, 430 kilometers an hour. Following these impressive stats, the subheading Safe annotated the promise: during running, the vehicle wraps around the guideway, eliminating the possibility of derailment. It was a relief, as the prospect of being hurled into the Huangpu River wasn't quite what I had in mind when I conspired to arrive in Shanghai in style. Settling window side, I noticed the train was scarcely half full. But we were not about to wait around, as with surprisingly little fanfare, the Shanghai Maglev took off, quite literally levitating above the track, the carriage held in place by opposing magnets. We whistled along at 100, 200, then 300 kilometers an hour, banking around the first bend like a superbike at the Macau Grand Prix. When we reached the top speed of 431 kilometers an hour, the engine rumbled in concert with a spattering of passengers cheering like children on a roller coaster that was about to go loop-de-loop. Outside, factories, parks, and multi-level expressways blended into a surrealist dreamscape. Inside, all eyes were trained on the speedometers strategically positioned above the carriage doorways. Moments after we reached this exhilarating pitch, however, the train decelerated, and we soon arrived at Longyang Road Station, a terminus devoid of interest or distraction. I descended to ground where the oily odor of Chinese fast food coalesced with smog, my first proper lungful of Shanghai air, dank and heavy. While haplessly looking around for a signpost to somewhere, I couldn't shake the lingering sense that the 8-minute dash probably wasn't worth the 50 yuan ticket, which is why the Shanghainese largely shunned the maglev in favor of the metro, rendering the world's fastest commercial train a tourist novelty. Okay, so that was then China's fastest train. They no longer let the maglev run at that speed, 431 kilometers. It now runs at 340 kilometers an hour. Can anyone guess why? Well, the official reason is safety. My conjectured reason is because nothing can go faster than Xi Jinping's signature Rejuvenation Express. You can't overtake the emperor, right? But that's just conjecture. I have no facts to support that. This is the Kindle version, so I'll just search quickly for the next section I'd like to read to you, if that's okay. You can bear with me. I should find it. Ah, there we go. Okay. This was a wonderful train journey that I took in rural Sichuan province, in Leshan. Are you familiar with the very large Buddha? I think it's the world's largest standing Buddha there. Leshan, the region was a coal mining area during World War II. The mines had been in northeast China, and when the Japanese came in, they moved the mines into the interior where they had some coal they could access. And mining continued there until the 1980s and 90s. It wasn't very profitable anymore. And so the young people dispersed and went to the East Coast to find jobs in manufacturing. But the villagers and the mining families who were old didn't want to move. That was their home. And there was no road, so they had to maintain an old narrow gauge steam train. So this is a country that, I'm talking about superlatives, but on one coast they have a maglev, and in the interior people are still getting by on choo-choo trains. So this is what the choo-choo train was like. Standing beside me was a wrinkled man in a blue Mao hat and a worker's jacket, who looked to have been frozen in time since 1958 and only recently thawed out. He moved slowly, twitching to suck at a cigar, and appeared slightly nervous in the presence of a foreigner armed with a camera and a notepad. A uniformed man communicated with the driver by whistling until all 4 wooden carriages were coupled to the steam engine. He then ordered the old man, me, and a gaggle of vegetable-burdened peasant women to board. With some disconcerting shunts, we began our journey, soon forging a route through muddy rice and cabbage fields. I struggled to get acquainted with the wooden chair, although the bucolic environs more than made up for the discomfort of the carriage. We shunted into Honeybee Crag 20 minutes down the line, a railway graveyard littered with rusty train engines and abandoned gondolas, relics of a time before China's 21st century great leaps. A villager boarded clutching chickens, one under each arm, which squirmed and squawked as the train engine noisily decoupled and skirted around us, making a switchback, reconnecting at the rear to push us up a steep mountain ridge. We were soon rolling through thick vegetation, wild forests blanketed a deep gorge called Shenren Shagu, Canyon of the Immortals. "Where are you from, foreign friend?" the man in the Mao hat asked, having overcome his initial shyness. "The UK," I called over the clunking carriages and chicken chatter. "Hao Difang," he said, giving me a thumbs up, meaning a good place. It has its charms, I suppose. He paused for a while, then said, "It was you Brits that made this railway famous. They started to come here again back about 10 years back, photographing everything and asking all sorts of questions." "Really?" "Oh yes, just a few of them at first, then more and more until the government decided to make this into a scenic spot and open it up to tourism." "Why did you say again?" "Because you people came here before, a long time ago." "Really? You'll see what I mean in Bajiaogo." We pulled into Rapeseed Flower Dam, where the man alighted just ahead of the highest point on the railway, Eagle Beak, a perilous ridge we traced at half speed. I couldn't help but imagine the train tripping into the river below, our untimely end commemorated with a Hollywood-style explosion. But our premature end comes at Jiao Dam instead, commemorated by an unhealthy wheeze of the boiler, one stop before our destination. "The tracks are damaged up ahead," the conductor said unapologetically, adding, "We stop here." I followed the peasant women onto a minuscule platform, and they promptly disappeared into the villages, leaving me alone for some confused minutes, stricken in deepest Sichuan. Eventually, a villager sporting Wellington boots called at me from a trackside field. "Hey, where you going, Lao Wai?" "Bajiaogo," I replied. "Need a ride?" "Sure." 5 yuan, he asked. "Great," I said, knowing I would have paid 100. In China, there is always a way, I managed to scribble in my diary seconds before he arrived on his Yamaha, a cigar butt dangling from his lip as if it had been glued there years ago. For half a mile at least, we coasted along the ballast until, just before a tunnel, he swerved from the tracks onto a narrow mountain road. Our route then traced a path with more turns in it than a snake hugging a hosepipe, until we stopped at a vintage hill settlement, half submerged in vegetation. "This is Bajiago, industrial township," he explained, applying its full name before pointing to the town square. "You can find somewhere to stay over there." Hoisting my backpack onto my shoulders, I paid him and made for the square, the East is Red Plaza, suggesting the handiwork of an enthusiastic local tourist bureau. Yet this was no romantic piece of branding. The plaza itself boasted an enormous outdoor theatre, topped by a portrait of the youthful great helmsman and a big character sign that read, "Mao Zedong thought, grand stage." The scale of the square was extraordinary when compared with its surroundings, evoking a time when this place mattered, or mattered a lot more than it did when I arrived. Though the square was empty bar a few aunties exercising to the beat of a Taiwanese pop song, my imagination couldn't help but populate it with fanatical red guards, a landlord on stage wearing a dunce hat and confessing his class crimes, a standard form of humiliation during those ideological times. In the People's Canteen, opposite the stage, I encountered some old-timers sucking on long tobacco pipes and sipping tea. None could speak Mandarin with any fluency, so I followed my nose down a side street to a restaurant dishing up Sichuan staples and accosted the restaurateur. "Excuse me, boss, Know of anywhere I might stay for the night? Follow me, Lao Wai, she replied, promptly removing her apron and marching me down the road like a child late for school. I was led to the end of a hillside street and effectively into somebody's house, then abandoned in the courtyard while she walked street side to call someone on her vintage Nokia. Bats were already whizzing overhead, daylight fading. Eventually, a man wrinkled like an old sock arrived with a set of keys. Opening the door, he led me into a room equipped with all the mod cons you might expect in a place where March of the Revolutionary Youth was still top of the pops, including an ensuite squat toilet and a complimentary hose, a rust-colored roof fan, and an enormous Sanyo television set manufactured circa 1983. I'm assuming the honeymoon suite is already occupied, I quipped. Shama, never mind, how much is it? 30 yuan, I'll take it. Here's the key. It doesn't work very well, so just leave the door open when you go out, okay? Is it safe? The man and woman burst into laughter. Is it safe? He repeated, and they wandered away without checking my passport or asking for a deposit. Despite my rustic and somewhat bizarre environs, it felt good to have secured a roof for the night. I dropped my bag, pulled out my diary, and tried to take stock of the day. China's all-encompassing public transport network had moved me from a city of electric brand logos to a township of Cultural Revolution slogans. A shift in time and place only possible in a country as big and lopsided as this one, I wrote. I consoled myself with the prospect of the dawn, concluding my diary entry thus: tomorrow will shed light on everything. Then closing my book, I triumphantly fell onto the bed, which collapsed, rolling me headfirst onto the floor like an armadillo. Okay. So, thank you. So there you get to see the sort of many Chinas that exist in China. I won't keep talking for too long because we're going to have a Q&A. So if we could just have the last slides, and I'll briefly just talk about some of the other themes that appear in the book. So one of the things that I found quite remarkable was how many of China's lines were colonial in origin. And this is documented in the book. So you have Japanese Shenyang Station, you have Russian stations in Harbin still. This is a British-built railway station that's still in Nanjing, and we have the French colonial lines in Yunnan. That became quite a big theme of the book as well, as I went to understand why China was so obsessed with building railways. And that's because they believe they have been victims of railway imperialism. We often talk about gunboat imperialism, especially with regards to the Pearl River Delta area. But it is true that he who owns the railway dominates the economy. You can move freight and also men and arms if you need to. And of course, lest we not forget that the 19th century was the time that preceded air travel. Okay, next slide. So again, one of the things that also struck me when I was traveling around was just the extraordinary diversity. You know, this is a country where it can be minus 30 in Heilongjiang and 30 degrees in Hainan Island, where you can be on the Tibetan Plateau or in a sort of East Coast megacity, and that none of the images that you see when you travel around China really conform to the sort of one or two dimensional idea we have when we talk about it in general terms or in the press. And I think that underlines the value of travel writing, which is a question that people often ask me nowadays. You know, what's the point in writing a travel book when I can open Instagram and see anything? Well, it's the story behind the headlines, it's the nuances, it's the contradictions that make, I think, travel writing still a valid form of documenting the strange world we live in. So on that note, will be the last slide. Yeah, so if you do end up buying my book, please do leave a kind review on Amazon or Goodreads. That does help sales. And also, if you'd like to follow me further, please follow me on Facebook or Instagram. And now we will have a Q&A, so please don't be shy if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Just before we get to the Q&A, I'll just say I did want to mention that Thomas's book is available for sale upstairs. Thomas also wrote a lovely article for us in this issue of the magazine. He interviewed Lawrence Osborne, I believe. So please feel free to pick up a copy. Just before I open up to the floor, Thomas, can I just ask, you mentioned that you're doing a little bit of work now for the Rough Guide.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing now with that, and maybe how that sort of compares to the work you were doing writing the novel all those years ago? Okay,
so I should mention we're blessed with Terry Duckham here, who's writing the Hong Kong and Macau chapters of the forthcoming Rough Guides titles. So Rough Guides and Insight Guides, they're now the same company. And actually, when I was rolling around China on railways, I needed money. And so a lot of it was just that you'd get commissioned to do a guidebook, and that would take you to wherever you would go. But I often felt when I did like a guidebook, you would write about Chengdu, the destination, whereas actually the train from Guangzhou to Chengdu was more interesting than actually what you were putting in the guidebook, like the strange and funny things that would happen to you. During COVID-19, so 2020 is really when things got locked down. We were halfway through a new edition of both Rough Guides to China and Insight Guides China. Everything was cancelled. And I was stranded in Malaysia on a beach. And the problem... Yeah, it could have been worse. Yeah, it could have been worse. So... Actually, I had nothing to do, which is why I wrote Harmony Express, because I'm quite a lazy person. I enjoy traveling, but the discipline of actually sitting and writing about it is a lot harder. There was too much fun to be had before. So I actually called my ayi in Beijing, and I was like, ayi, can you send me some like biji ben? I have like a bag full of notebooks, and so that's how I wrote the book up. After COVID-19, so in about 2022, Southeast Asia opened up very quickly, and there was this like surge on guidebooks. Suddenly all these publishers were like, oh no, we haven't got a Thailand book, we haven't got a Philippines book, because China remained closed for one more year. Nothing was commissioned. Then when China reopened, there remains this US-China ongoing tension, and it wasn't great for tourism. But right now, as I understand it, because China's enacted all these policies for visa-free travel for most nations, tourism is trickling back, and so we've been commissioned to do both the Rough Guide to South China and the Rough Guide to North China. They're doing 2 books. Yeah.
And what is the state of sort of travel writing at this day? I was in Hanoi Airport a couple of weeks ago, and I was kind of shocked to see an entire shelf full of Lonely Planet guides. Yeah. Which I mean, when I first came to China, that was all I had, and it was pretty useful. But I mean, these days, I wonder, do people still? Do people read at all anymore? Yeah, well, that too. Yeah.
That is a good question. I mean, there's no question that guidebooks aren't as significant as they were, in the 90s and 2000s when we were kicking around before the internet was so open. And also guidebooks now, when you write them, they're more. You understand that someone's going to use like Booking.com. So you're more sort of introducing the history, the culture, and the basic practicalities. So it's difficult to book a train in China these days because there's no physical ticket anymore. So best to use this app or this website, which has an English language service. You're sort of doing that. I went to Africa, I went to Kenya on assignment for the South China Morning Post. And I suddenly realized how amazing guidebooks are, because I'd never been to Africa. I knew nothing about the place. And suddenly having this like small curated piece of text, rather than scrolling through endless like listicles and, you know, blogosphere nonsense, you know, having something that's been written by an expert, I found very useful. I might be a dinosaur, they might be going extinct, but while someone's paying for me to write them, I'll still write them. But I will say this about technology, you know, we do get very dramatic. I remember in the 90s, when I was coming of age, and they started to build digital keyboards for the first time that could sound like a violin or a cello. You remember in the 70s and 80s, they sounded like synthesizers. They didn't actually sound like anything else. Suddenly they were like, oh, it sounds like a guitar, or you can just press a drum beat. So, you know, the band will die out inevitably. Well, it hasn't happened at all, right? I think, you know, vinyl LPs outsold CDs for the last 3 years, you know. Why do vinyl LPs still exist in the age of streaming? People clearly like physical media. They like things they can collect, put on a shelf. And you have a different relationship with physical media, in the same way you have a different relationship with a book than you do with a blog, you know. But I suspect I'm preaching to the converted here, because this is a literature festival, and all the people outside are all on their phones wondering what a guidebook is. Yeah. So, there we go.
You mentioned how quickly rapidly China's developed, and it's funny listening to you reading and listening to the audience reaction. It seems like everybody can relate to something that you're talking about there. Is another one of the challenges just the fact that things change so quickly in China, and so that what you write today, by the time it gets published, could be out of date? Is that a...
I mean, you know, I wanted to write an updated version of Riding the Iron Rooster, and now somebody could write an updated version of Harmony Express. It only came out 3 years ago, but it's already belongs to a pre-pandemic period, and the technology's advanced since then, and society's changed since then. What I will say is that, particularly in the age of the mobile phone and stuff like that, you can't compete with the speed of digital media. But when you're writing travel literature, you should be writing for the ages. You should be writing for the next generation to come along and have a resource of what you saw and how you experienced. You know, I really like reading 19th century travel logs, you know, like Isabella Bird, who shares a surname with me, and she went up the Yangtze, and she's full of the prejudices of a Victorian woman. She's quite prim and proper. She's Christian. She can be quite condescending about the natives and use that kind of language. But at the same time, she witnesses China in a way that, you know, we couldn't witness. So she's an extraordinary resource, right? So I think when you're writing travel literature, you're not just writing a document of how things are, but you should be writing for the ages. Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's enough for me. Yeah, let me open up to the floor. And
thank you, Thomas, for bringing this subject to Macau. Traveling is part of our, I would say, our community life as well, because we are in a place where traveling is becoming very popular. And we had a little talk before before this before your speech about, and we said, I think we agree that to travel is much more fun than writing about it, right? It's really the fun thing is to travel and experience the things. When you started this plan of writing about the trains, you went to travel already thinking of writing about it, or you went to travel and then you thought maybe I should show it to the world? And the fact that China is a difficult country to communicate, do you speak Chinese and it helped you in your writings?
Yeah, so I think there's two questions there. One is the my approach to the book, which was, I had this idea for a long time, But it is more fun researching a travel book than sitting down at your desk and writing it, which is why most of the writing occurred during the pandemic. Like even in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, I had all these ideas. Oh, I need to go to Gansu province, and I still haven't been to Xinjiang, and I've got to take a train through Inner Mongolia. I think if the pandemic had never happened, I would have had like 1,000 diaries and no book. So while I did have that idea and I did keep the diary, I definitely lacked the discipline. It's one of those cruel things, travel writing seems like a romantic occupation, and I often do talks in universities and schools, and they're like, wow, so you get paid to travel. That's the thing they say, right? And it's like 80% of the time is sat alone at your computer. It's very tedious and very lonely. And then the other 20% is actual travel. And then I think the second part of your question was asking me about Chinese. So yeah, that's sort of a distinction between maybe Paul Theroux and Colin Thurbron and Bruce Chatwin and other writers that came in the 80s and 90s, is that I do speak Chinese, and I gave over quite a lot of space to the book, to just the conversations I have on Chinese trains, and just trying to let the Chinese speak for their worldview. Again, because it's, journalism is important, but it tends to focus on certain topics. And just meeting somebody, on a bunk bed in a green train rolling through Henan province, and they tell you about their economic concerns or the difficulties they're having with their wife, or while the potato crop is not very good this year. That's interesting, right? That's kind of the advantage of a book as opposed to journalism or even social media commentary. And that sort of distinguished, I think, my approach from some of the other travel writers that just kind of rock in and don't really speak Chinese, or speak it in a sort of primitive way and stuff. I hope that sort of adds to it, yeah.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you so much for coming here.
Oh, thank
My
you,
English is
Fiona.
not as bad. I have to follow it some kind of... it's very difficult for me to follow your English, your British accent.
Oh, really?
But I just want to say that not only it's an amazing book for sure, and we travel with you, with your words. Through your words, we can already travel with you, which is really impressive. And also something that is, I'm an architect, and I'm in the visual world. I think you are very visual, the way you speak and the way you probably have the text written, which means it not only is a travel around China by train, but it's the timing and all these too fast or too slow, or all these moments that we have in life that brings us to the question of how slow we live, or how we want to slow down our lives in this crazy world. So it's kind of also some kind of critical eye on this way of living, right? So I think it's not only the story about all these trains that just gain a lot of kilometers in China, and all this diversity, and also your architect eye, because you distinguish these contrasts that is in the built world, which is something that we just cannot observe. All of us, we're not trained to observe this, because we are too immersed in this world of the built things. So we don't see these kind of things. So maybe because you're isolated in the train, you can see through the window and you have this perspective. What do you think about it? You're very visual. I can visualize all the images about your talks.
I think you've made like 3 really important points there. One is that travel is, it is the ultimate metaphor for life, right? The Taoists in Lao Tzu talks about that you go from the mountains to the sea, because Chinese rivers, the main rivers, the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, right, they go from west to east, okay? They don't go from north to south. And sometimes the water flows fast, and sometimes it flows slowly. Sometimes you hit the rocks, sometimes it's smooth, but you end up at the ocean at the end of the day. And, trains, more than any other form of modern transport, offer that perspective. If you're in an aeroplane, every aeroplane journey is the same. is the same. Sucks. And cars, I mean, I get car sick. You're jammed in with like 4 people. You probably hate at least one of them. You know, the sort of endless highway doesn't really, I don't think it really adds anything to the landscape. I think actually railways are attractive to the landscape. And then when you talk about this like visual dimension, I mean, yes, as writers, we are trying to bring a scene that we have seen to life, and our eyes are our most important sense. But they are not our only sense. And one mistake that a lot of people getting into travel writers make is they say, I saw this, and then I saw this, and then I saw this. But what did it smell like? What did it taste like? And what did it feel like? And if you can find a way to get that into the pages, then, you know, the armchair traveler is going to be with you all the way, you know. But yeah, I think very much the railway is a perspective on the world, and travel is an analogy of our living experience. Yeah. Does that answer what you say?
Okay, Thomas, thank you very much. I want to ask you a practical question.
Yes.
You have kilometers almost as the China network in terms of travel.
Yeah.
What I want to know, you travel for writing and for working. I want to ask your advice for us to the correct way of going on a train in China and the best way to enjoy it.
Okay, so that's like the practical guidebook writer thing. WeChat, China's incredible app, but you don't have WeChat?
No. I mean, the best attitude to travel in China for you to enjoy the best as possible.
I mean, China seems to have quite a polarizing effect on people. Like, you meet people that really sort of love China, and people that are just appalled by it. And I don't meet many people in between that are just like, oh, it's okay. They're usually like, wow, I just had this most amazing time, or it was terrible, nobody lined up, and they spat everywhere, and they pushed me around. I mean, I would just say that, Macau and Hong Kong are slightly different because of their colonial experience, right? And because they're now international cities. When you enter the mainland, you are entering a empire-sized state. Okay, after 1949, the communists more or less reconquered the Qing Empire. You are also entering a civilizational state where the values differ strongly from your own, where the customs and practices differ strongly from your own. So you should approach that with humility. And that is often so lost on Western travelers, and yeah, if you go in a big Chinese train station, somebody's going to push in front of you. It's going to happen, right? But I tell you this as well, when you're in some small town, some Chinese person's going to offer you their bed. That's happened to me so many times. You stay in my room because my room is the best one in the village, and I'll sleep on the sofa. And let me tell you, I can say in my country at least, if you're in a village or a small town, nobody's offering you a bed, okay? Although British people are better at lining up. So it's a kind of yin-yang experience. So have some humility. I did a book talk in Bangkok recently, and there was an American guy who'd been in China, and he was just utterly appalled by the place, and seemed to think that I would share his opinion as well. He's like, can you just believe the way it is? And I was like, I quite like it. That said, again, some travel writers like Paul Theroux, they've covered the entire world, right, in their writing. Latin America, Africa, India, China, they've done it all. Some of us tend to, colonize a space or a region, and, if somebody is passionate about travel in India and not passionate about travel in China, that's fine too, right? Follow your passion. Don't suffer something unnecessarily. But for me, maybe it's because I did Chinese in university and I have a strong sense of the history of the place. I just feel like every journey is an education, It's been around so long, it's so big. It's still going. It's really a remarkable place. And not to say that it's not a place without its problems, because it's got immense problems, but I think the political coverage just can color our travel experiences, and, it needn't. Okay.
It was really fascinating to hear your stories, because it's very vivid the way you read about what you've written. And I look forward to reading about your book. You mentioned earlier about discipline, that it took you some time, so there's some commissioned work that is required, so of course that's a must to do. Yeah. But when it comes to writing a novel such as this, it took you some time. Now, with digitization and as well as with the rise of AI, what is your perspective about this? Because there's quite a lot of new authors coming into play, and as well as some old authors, and AI plays some role in terms of making us probably a little bit more disciplined to make things happen or to do things faster. I don't know, what is your thoughts on this? In terms of creativity, putting your own thought and, yeah.
Okay, asking a writer about AI. I get this one every time. I'll put my hand up. I'm a complete Luddite with technology. I'm still getting to grips with the iPhone. I know it's been out a while. I do hear what people are talking about AI can do, but you mentioned a novel. This is not a novel. This is a travelogue. And I don't imagine that, like, an AI piece of software could wander the borders of Myanmar, speaking to the local villages and reporting back on that. That's like a uniquely human thing. As for creativity with regards to novels, most novels are shit. These sort of very generic romance or detective novels, I can imagine it doing a pretty good imitation of those. But when it comes to sort of great literature, surely the defining quality of great literature is its human qualities, right? And that it doesn't follow a template, and that it takes you into places that you couldn't have imagined. I don't know if it's going to be able to do that. Again, I'm not a tech guy. But certainly the generic stuff, the bog standard stuff, it's going to do. But yeah, can it ride a train and drink tea with a migrant worker from Hubei? Not yet, but come back to this in 10 years. This will go viral in 10 years when there's a robot drinking tea with a migrant worker. Okay, that's the best I can do on that one, I'm afraid. Okay.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
Since you traveled all over China by train, what trip would you advise if you could only have one? And on the other hand, which would you probably never do again?
Oh, yeah. Never do again. Well, I got arrested in Mongolia. Yeah, some of the border region, they're not very good. Well, the best one, which is not in my book because it didn't exist until very recently, is the high-speed train that goes from Kunming to Shangri-La. So it used to be a slow-speed train, in fact, China's slowest train, and they ran 3 of them at night, so you saw nothing. But you go through Dali, Lijiang, up to the Tibetan plateau, 3,000 meters above, and it's in the daytime, and the scenery is off the charts. It is absolutely breathtaking. That's a really special one. A nice one from Zhuhai is to go Guiyang to Zhuhai. This thing goes through Guilin, and so you go through all the karst mountain scenery. That's a very scenic and very easy one to do. You could do it on a weekend. And Guiyang, which used to be a very poor, sort of filthy backwater city, is really quite pleasant these days. So they've done a great job of sprucing up Guiyang. The ones I didn't enjoy too much. I mean, I enjoy them all in some way. Like even there's a saying in travel writing, a bad journey makes a good story, right? But I did run into some trouble in northeast China, and it was so cold. It was like minus 25, and it's economically just stagnant up there in the old Rust Belt. And people are rough. I wouldn't say they're mean. They're just toughened by their environment up there. It's not the most sort of friendly place to end up in a sort of like Mongolian karaoke place. It's minus 20 degrees outside. But very interesting. There's nowhere that's not interesting, Okay.
Also, thank you for your brilliant talk. I would like to ask, because of course you have the advantage of being able to speak Mandarin, but for sure the biggest barrier in traveling in China is the language.
Yeah.
And not only that, of course, if we go to China, it's very hard to find ways to pay for stuff.
Yeah.
Because you'll need a WeChat Pay, but to have WeChat Pay, you need a bank account in China or something like that.
Yeah.
So do you think it's actually possible to, without the language, and just to go into the middle of China and
Right. That's two questions. So firstly, language. When did we expect the whole world to speak English? This is a very recent thing, right? People have been traveling for centuries and getting by some way or another, okay? Of course, it's advantage to speak English or to speak a local language, but, you can always find a way. The technology thing is a bit more frustrating because China's attitude to all technology is like security, security, security. Oh, and foreigners. Shit, we forgot about that. Let's just kind of change things a little bit. So on this last journey, I did pay attention to that. And I noticed that the railway stations now are showing only in Chinese characters, not even pinyin, no English, and no announcement in English, where they used to do all of that. That's definitely a political decision on the part of the government that's trying to make Mandarin the language and the only language. But the trains are numbered, so numbers are universal, right? Just use your brain. Alipay, you can connect to a foreign bank, so you can buy stuff in China. WeChat Pay, you cannot. However, you can. I'm on camera, right? Right. To get around, you just find a Chinese friend and you just give them 1,000 kuai and get them to send it back to you on WeChat, and then you got your credits. The law states they must accept cash. So I know.
I tried buying popcorn in a football stadium in 2019. I couldn't.
Well,
With cash.
2019, this was the problem. So running up to the pandemic, they had a lot of... The issue was elderly people and rural people that didn't have an education are still using old kind of Nokia phones. And they wouldn't be able to buy cabbage or something. Because they're like, just scan here. They're like, I don't know how to scan. Yeah, what do you mean? So the government has come in post-pandemic quite heavily and emphasizing, and also saying that you can report somebody if they don't accept cash. You can say, I went to this coffee shop. That said, you still like run into problems. I couldn't, I got on a bus in Dali, and they're like, you have to download the local transport app. And, yeah, it's a challenge, but there are ways around it. I think, but especially with the language, not understanding stuff can be almost as interesting as understanding stuff, right? I mean, part of travel is about getting lost, right? You know.
Having said that, from a Macau perspective, I've been living here for quite a few years. I noticed that the last year, 2 years, China has been making it very much more easier for a foreigner to go to China first and to travel, because as you say, now you have Alipay you can have with a credit card, and even in Alipay you have Didi in English. So it's like when they want, they really make it easier for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of people describe China as like a stumbling giant. So it's so big and so centralized that it will stumble one way where it's like, we need more technology, we need more security. And then they're like, oh no, we don't have any tourists. We'll stumble this way with new policies and visa-free. Oh, there's too many foreigners running around. Oh, and that's the sort of the pendulum swing that happens in China, yeah. But I mean, of course, in Macau and Hong Kong, they're so well set up for the international experience. You know, it's almost too cozy, and China's just not operating in that way, you know, for a multitude of reasons. Is that all of them?
That's right, okay. All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for all your great questions, and thank you, Thomas, for a really fascinating conversation. Coming from Australia, I did have a little bit of trouble understanding your funny English accent as well, but no problem. Joking. Just kidding. You know, I think we've got a room full of kindred spirits. Everybody here has probably done some travel in China, and I think we all love it. And I think despite the various challenges, especially I think the technology is the interesting one, isn't it? Because in so many places it makes it easier, but I'm the same. I find that technology has almost made traveling in China more difficult for me as a foreigner, but it is still, it's an amazing place to travel, and the high-speed rails are just unbelievable these days. Really transforms everything, doesn't it? So anyway, thank you, Thomas, for your presentation. I'm very, very grateful for your time. We do have Thomas's book here for sale, and if you would like to get it autographed, of course, while Thomas is here, you can. We're going to operate on a bit of an honesty system. If you get it signed here, you must go upstairs to pay for it. But then it's also for sale upstairs. There are more copies of it upstairs. So please, if you'd like to get Thomas to sign it for you, please don't forget to go upstairs and pay for it. I need my salary too. And just a quick reminder that later on this evening, sorry, the print on this program is tiny, but it's at 9:15. We have 9:15. There is a movie screening tonight at Cinema Alegria, which is Remains of the Wind by Tiago Guedes, Portuguese director. So please, if you'd love to grab some dinner, and then I think the cinema is just a 10-minute walk from here. Please, everybody's welcome to join us there. And of course, the rest of the weekend, we still have a very full program for the festival for the final weekend of the show. So please put your hands together and express some gratitude for Thomas. Thanks.
Thanks, man.